You ever think you know someone, only to find out that everything they told you is a lie? You think you're in control until you realize you've handed over the very thing you were trying to protect. Yeah, I was that guy. Let me back up and introduce myself. My name's Jason Rivers. I'm 32 years old, living in Phoenix, Arizona. I'm not the type of guy who lets his emotions get the best of him. At least, I used to think I wasn't. I'm the kind of guy who had everything figured out. Well, that's what I told myself. I worked hard, climbed the ladder in my career, and played by the rules. I had a decent circle of friends, a nice apartment, and a job that kept me busy with the occasional weekend getaway to remind me that life wasn't just about work. But then she showed up. Tara. You know how it goes? Everything was fine until it wasn't. I didn't believe in fate, didn't think the universe had some big plan for me. But Tara? She changed all that. She walked into my life when I wasn't looking, and I let her in like an idiot. A few kind words here, a little smile there, and suddenly I was doing things I'd never thought I'd do. I was opening up, lowering my walls, and trusting someone I barely knew. And then, well, I'll tell you what happened. But first, I need you to understand something. I wasn't always like this. I was the guy who prided himself on being guarded. No one got close to me. Not because I was cold, but because I had too much to protect. My time, my money, my heart, everything I worked for. But Tara? She didn't care about any of that. She saw me, and for the first time, someone made me feel seen, like I mattered. And I thought that was enough. You see, life has a way of showing you just how wrong you can be. Just when you think you've got it all figured out, when you think you're in control, it all slips away. Tara wasn't what I thought she was. No, she was something far darker, something I never saw coming. And I was the fool. It was a cold winter evening in Phoenix, the kind where the city's usual hum seemed to be muffled by the crisp air. The streets were still busy, people rushing in every direction, their breath visible in the frosty night. I was one of them, rushing home from a long corporate meeting. I worked in finance, so I knew the drill. Hustle, grind, go home. The usual. But tonight was different. Maybe it was the weariness in my bones or the lingering thoughts about the meeting. Either way, my mind wasn't entirely on the road ahead. I wasn't paying attention when I bumped into her. Tara. She was sitting on a worn-out blanket against the side of a cafe, her knees drawn up to her chest, her head resting against the brick wall. I almost stepped over her, but something made me pause. Maybe it was the way her eyes flicked up at me when I passed by. There was something in them that pulled at me, something that felt raw, desperate, yet strangely calm. She had the kind of face that told a story without speaking a word, sharp cheekbones, lips pressed into a thin line, dark hair tangled and messy, but her eyes told me she'd seen too much, and still, she had a certain grace. I'd walked past people like her before. Homeless, broken. But Tara, something about her made me stop. Hey, I said, almost awkwardly glancing down at her. You hungry? She looked up at me, the faintest glimmer of surprise in her eyes. Then she nodded. I could eat. I didn't think much of it. I pulled out my wallet and offered her a few bills, but instead of taking the money, she looked at me for a long moment. There was something in her gaze, something unspoken. Then in a soft voice she said, I don't need money, but I'd take a meal. I nodded, my heart sinking just a little. I never gave money to people on the street, but I could buy her a meal, couldn't I? It wasn't much. All right, I said, stepping back. I'll be right back. I found a nearby diner that was still open. A few minutes later, I returned with a sandwich and a coffee. She took the food, not bothering with the pleasantries I'd expected. She just ate, and I watched, unsure of what to say. There was no gratitude in her eyes, just a quiet acceptance, like she'd seen far too many good Samaritans come and go. I felt a strange pang, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. As she ate, I found myself asking the question that had been gnawing at me since I first stopped. Why? Why does someone like her end up here? I wasn't the type of person to ask such questions. I had a lot of answers in my life, things I could control, things I understood. But Tara, she made me wonder. Was it a series of bad decisions? Or was there something deeper? Something no one knew? I had always prided myself on understanding people, on keeping my emotions in check. Yet here I was looking at a woman I had just met, and I felt like I was looking into the void. I stood there for a moment longer, unsure if I should say something, but all I managed to do was offer her a small, awkward smile. Take care of yourself, all right? She looked up at me for the briefest second, a slight, almost imperceptible nod, but in her eyes, I saw something I hadn't expected, resignation mixed with a glimmer of something else. Hope? Regret? I wasn't sure. It felt like I had just met someone who had a story far deeper than I could ever imagine. As I walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't just given her a meal. I had given her something else, an invitation to my curiosity, an opening to a story that was about to change everything. And maybe, just maybe, I was about to lose control of it all. Over the next few weeks, I found myself returning to that same street corner more and more often. It started small, just a quick hello, a brief check-in. But every time I saw her, Tara was sitting there waiting. Her eyes would light up when she saw me, and she'd smile. It wasn't just a smile, it was the kind of smile that made you feel like you were the only person in the world who mattered at that moment. The warmth in her gaze was magnetic. She made you feel seen, like she knew you and understood you, even if she didn't. Our conversations began to grow longer, deeper. She spoke with a kind of charm I couldn't shake, weaving tales of her past, stories of cities she'd lived in, people she'd known, dreams she'd once held. She wasn't like anyone I had met before. She wasn't a victim, not in the way most people would expect. She was sharp, quick-witted, full of life in a way that made me forget she was living on the streets. Tara would tell me about her childhood, how she once had everything, an education, a family, a future. She'd speak of her mistakes, of love lost, of bad decisions that led her here. And every time she'd talk about how she was still hopeful for something better, like the world was just waiting for her to make one last move. I didn't know why, but I believed her. I believed every word. There was something about her, some aura, that made me want to help her, to fix everything that had gone wrong in her life. I started showing up more frequently. First, I brought her food, just something simple, a sandwich, a coffee. Then I noticed she was always wearing the same ragged clothes, and that made something in me snap. I came back with a jacket, a pair of jeans. I could see the hesitation in her eyes when I handed them to her, like she wasn't sure whether to accept them. But then she did, silently. I wasn't doing this out of charity. No, it wasn't like that. It was something else. There was a connection between us that I couldn't explain. It wasn't just kindness on my part. It was something more profound, something I hadn't expected. She wasn't just a homeless woman. She was someone who made me feel something I hadn't felt in a long time. I found myself looking forward to those moments, those conversations with Tara. And it wasn't just about giving her things anymore. I wanted to know her story, her truth. The more I listened to her, the more I wanted to help. I promised myself I'd get her off the streets. Maybe if I gave her the right opportunity, she could get back on her feet. She was so intelligent, so beautiful, yet here she was stuck in a place I couldn't fathom. I couldn't understand why someone like her would end up here in this situation. I kept asking myself, why? Why someone like Tara? Why would someone with so much potential end up living on the streets, begging for help? The more I thought about it, the more I couldn't let it go. I wanted to find out. I told myself that I could help her, that I had to. I was the kind of guy who believed in hard work, who thought he could fix things with effort. I believed that if I could just get Tara the right help, show her the right path, maybe she could turn her life around. But as I spent more time with her, I realized something. It wasn't just about fixing her life. It was about something else, something inside me that was beginning to shift. I was falling for her, falling hard. I had always prided myself on being the guy who didn't let emotions rule him, the one who kept things logical. But here I was, feeling everything I'd tried to keep buried. I felt exposed, vulnerable, like I had given a part of myself to Tara without even realizing it. And I was terrified. She had become my obsession. Every visit, every conversation made it harder to hold on to that control I used to have. I was no longer the guy who helped from a distance. I was becoming part of her world, and I wasn't sure if that was a good thing or not. But all I knew was that I couldn't stop thinking about her. I couldn't stop wondering who she really was beneath the charm, beneath the stories. The more I wanted to know, the deeper I was pulled into her world. The more I tried to save her, the more I felt like I was the one who needed saving. It was a cold evening when she invited me over. Tara had been talking about her new place for weeks, hinting at it with that soft smile that seemed to promise a better tomorrow. But I hadn't really thought she'd gotten one. I figured it would be another abandoned building or a corner in someone's apartment, some temporary arrangement she'd thrown together. But when I walked into that small, shabby apartment, I was stunned. It wasn't much, a one-bedroom, cluttered with mismatched furniture and peeling wallpaper. Yet, Tara had this way of making it feel different. She made it feel important. She had set up a little corner with a tiny table and a few candles, the room dimly lit with a warm glow. "I call it my palace," she said with a wink, as if she were proud of it. And somehow, I could see why. She made the place shine, not with luxury, but with care. It wasn't the apartment that was special, it was the way Tara was making it her own. The way she was making it feel like home for both of us. She showered me with affection. The way she looked at me, the way her voice softened whenever she spoke, made me feel seen in a way I hadn't felt in years. She made me feel important. We ate together, and she shared stories of how she had spent her days fixing up the apartment, how she was planning to start over. Her voice, her laughter, her touch, it was all too much. She was opening up to me, showing me a side of her that no one else saw, and I was falling for it. I hadn't realized how badly I'd been craving this kind of connection. Tara wasn't just another person in my life, she was something different. She wasn't interested in me for my money or my status. No, Tara seemed to appreciate me for who I was, my kindness, my willingness to help. It was more than just physical attraction. There was something deeper, something real. That night, something shifted between us. It wasn't just the apartment or the meal, or even the kindness she showed me. It was the way she looked at me as if I were her whole world. She kissed me slowly, her lips soft and gentle against mine. I didn't know what to expect, but I couldn't stop myself. I was falling into her, deeper than I had ever fallen into anyone. The kiss grew more intense, and before I knew it, we were tangled in the sheets. The world outside didn't exist anymore. In those moments, I forgot about my job, my responsibilities, the pressures of my life. Tara became my focus, the center of everything. She was no longer the woman on the street corner I tried to help. She was the woman I wanted, and that scared me. The next few weeks passed in a blur. I was at her apartment more often than I was at home. My work, my friends, my priorities, they all took a back seat to her. I stopped answering calls from my colleagues. I ignored my friends' texts, all in favor of spending time with Tara, and I didn't care. I didn't care that I was losing myself. I didn't care that I was neglecting my life. Tara had become my everything. When I was with her, I felt alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just the physical passion, though that was intense. It was the emotional connection. It was the way she made me feel like I was the only person in the world that mattered to her. In her eyes, I wasn't just Jason Rivers, the guy with the money and the perfect career. I was Jason, the man who could save her. And that felt good. But deep down, I knew something was off. I was falling fast, and I wasn't sure if this was real. Was Tara really the person I thought she was? Or was I just blinded by my own need to be needed? I kept telling myself that this was the real deal. She was the love I'd been searching for. Someone who saw past my wealth and into the real me. But the longer we were together, the more I realized that maybe, just maybe, I was too caught up in her world. And that's when the doubt began to creep in. Was I making a mistake? Or was she my salvation? I wasn't sure anymore. All I knew was that Tara had become the center of my world, and that terrified me. I'd given her everything. My heart, my time, my attention. And now I had to ask myself, was I falling for her? Or was I falling for the idea of her? The emotional tug-of-war was starting to take its toll, but I couldn't stop myself. I was too far gone. And the worst part, I didn't want to stop. It started slow, small things that didn't make sense. At first, I brushed them off. Tara had such a complicated past, I told myself. She was a survivor, a fighter. Who wouldn't have a few inconsistencies in their story? But as the weeks went on, the small things began to pile up. She would mention friends from her old life, people she claimed to have known in different cities, people I'd never heard of. She'd talk about places she'd been, events she'd attended, but the details always seemed hazy, too vague, too disconnected. I tried to ignore it, convincing myself it was just the fog of her past she was still working through. But every time she spoke about her life, it felt more and more like she was hiding something. I wanted to believe in her, to believe that she was just a victim of circumstance. But the doubts were starting to creep in, whether I wanted to admit it or not. Then came the requests. Tara, you really should get that checked out. I said one evening, after noticing her limping. What happened to your leg? It's nothing, she dismissed quickly, brushing past the question, but I could see the pain in her eyes. Just an old injury. I'll be fine. A few days later, I got a call. It was Tara, sounding distraught on the phone. Jason, I need help. I just got a medical bill. It's more than I can handle. Please, I don't know where else to turn. I hesitated. Something inside me felt wrong, but I ignored it. I'd been helping her for weeks now. Why stop? I told myself she was just in a tough spot. I wired her the money, not thinking twice. But then, a few days later, another message. Jason, I hate to ask again, but there's this legal fee I have to pay. It's urgent. Can you help me out? I felt that same pull, that sense of guilt that always seemed to rise up when I talked to her. I didn't want to let her down. I sent her the money again with no questions asked. But this time, something inside me felt off. It wasn't just her request that felt wrong, it was the way she asked. She always seemed so composed, so collected when she spoke to me, yet there was always this underlying desperation in her voice that I couldn't ignore. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being played, but I told myself it was just my paranoia. She needed help. I was in a position to give it, and I wanted to believe the best in her. Then came the twist. I wasn't supposed to go into her apartment when she wasn't there, but one evening I dropped off some clothes for her and the door was slightly open. I hesitated, but curiosity got the best of me, and I pushed it open thinking I'd just leave the clothes inside. That's when I saw it. A receipt, casually tossed on the coffee table, sticking out from under a pile of old magazines. It caught my eye immediately. The store name, Le Mode Luxe, a high-end boutique I knew all too well. I had shopped there a few times. The receipt was for a necklace, a gold pendant, a luxury item worth more than most people's rent. I froze. My heart sank. I didn't want to believe it. Maybe it wasn't hers. Maybe she had just found it or borrowed it. But when I picked up the receipt, my breath caught. The name on the receipt was Tara's. She had used my money, the money I'd sent her for urgent expenses, to buy herself a necklace. I felt the sting immediately sharp and cold. It was like I'd been punched in the gut. Betrayal. That's what it was. Tara had been lying to me all along, using me for her own gain, spinning stories to make me believe in her, to make me care for her. When she came home that evening, I didn't say anything at first. I just watched her. She didn't notice the receipt on the table, didn't mention the necklace. But the guilt in my chest grew heavier with every passing second. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. Tara, I said, my voice colder than I meant it to be, where did you get the money for this? I slid the receipt across the table. This isn't what you said it was. You told me you needed help. But this isn't help, Tara. This is deception. She froze, her face pale. For a long moment, she didn't speak. Then, slowly, she picked up the necklace, examining it as if it was some kind of treasure, a precious artifact that didn't belong to her. I didn't want you to know, she said softly, as if confessing to some minor transgression. I bought it for myself. For a special occasion, a little piece of something I could call my own. I didn't think you'd understand. I could feel my chest tighten, my heart pounding in my ears. All the warmth, all the affection I had felt for her, it was all slipping away. I had given her everything, trusted her when I shouldn't have. And now, I realized she had never loved me. Not really. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't about the necklace. It was the fact that she had lied to me, manipulated me, made me believe in something that wasn't real. And I had let her. The emotional impact hit hard. I felt foolish, betrayed. The sting of that realization cut deeper than any physical wound ever could. I had been used. And the worst part was, I had known it all along. But I chose to ignore the signs. I chose to trust her. And now, I had nothing but the bitter taste of regret. Tara's love was nothing but a mirage, and I was the fool who had walked straight into it. I couldn't believe it. I stood there, staring at Tara, the woman I had fallen for, the woman who had made me feel something real for the first time in years. I wanted answers. No, I demanded answers. My heart was still racing, and my hands were shaking. My mind couldn't catch up with what was happening. I had just seen the receipt, the lies, the deception. And now, standing in front of me, Tara was breaking down the walls that had held together everything I thought I knew about her. "I'm not who you think I am," she said, her voice steady, but there was something cold in her tone now. "I never was." My heart dropped. "What?" "I'm not homeless, Jason," she continued, her eyes finally meeting mine, but there was no guilt, no remorse in her gaze, only the same calm confidence that had pulled me in from the start. "I've been living a double life, a part of a group, a con. I manipulate wealthy men like you. You were never meant to be anything more than a mark. Just another fool I was playing." It hit me like a freight train. The words, the implications, they were all too much to process in one moment. I felt like I was suffocating, but my chest was hollow, the air thick, with the weight of her confession. "You were never real to me, Jason," she added, her voice now colder, harder. "You were just a stepping stone, a source of income. I never loved you. I was just waiting for the right time to leave." My mind was reeling. I had been played. Every word, every gesture, every smile, all of it had been a lie. A carefully constructed performance designed to get what she wanted. My money, my trust, my affection. I felt a mix of rage and disbelief, and it made my voice crack when I spoke. "How many others, Tara?" I could hardly get the words out, but I needed to know. "How many other men have you done this to? How many have you taken for everything they had?" Her lips curled into a small smile, as if my anger didn't faze her in the slightest. "You weren't the first, Jason," she said with a shrug, "and you won't be the last." My stomach churned. A pit formed in my chest as I stood there, frozen. I had thought I was helping her. I thought she needed me, that somehow I was giving her a chance at a better life. But no, she had been using me the same way she had used others before. My kindness, my generosity, it was just a tool to her, a way to get what she wanted. The next words she said struck me harder than anything else. "You're just another Mark. That's all you ever were." I don't think I've ever felt more humiliated in my life. She didn't care. She never did. I had been nothing more than a stepping stone in her scheme, a fool who had believed in her lies. And now, in this moment, I realized I had lost everything. Not just the money I'd given her, but something far worse, my self-respect. Then, without missing a beat, Tara gathered up everything she could. She took the clothes I had bought for her, the money I had given her, even the credit card she'd convinced me to let her use for emergencies. The receipt for the necklace was still sitting on the table. She took everything, and then with the same cold composure, she turned on her heel and walked toward the door. "Wait," I said, my voice shaky, but I couldn't stop myself. "Where are you going? What are you doing?" She didn't even turn back. "I'm done here. It's over, Jason. Don't bother trying to stop me." And just like that, she was gone. I was left standing there in the empty apartment, surrounded by the remnants of my foolishness. The apartment that had once felt like the place where everything was falling into place now felt hollow, empty, a symbol of everything I had lost. She had taken it all, my trust, my love, my money, and I was left with nothing but the pieces of my broken heart scattered on the floor. I sank to my knees, the weight of everything crashing down on me. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. How had I been so blind? How had I let her in, let her destroy me like this? The man I thought I was, the one who could control everything, was gone. The truth hit me harder than anything else. I wasn't just betrayed. I was humiliated, manipulated, and used. I felt the sting of every moment I had spent with her. Every time I had believed her. Every time I had let my guard down. She had played me from the beginning, and I had been too naive, too desperate to see it. The audience can feel Jason's devastation, the way his world shatters before him, piece by piece. He's left with nothing but the cold sting of betrayal and the realization that Tara's love had always been a lie. The emotional impact is palpable as Jason's trust and heart are shattered, leaving him with nothing but the wreckage of what he thought was real. The anger simmered inside me for weeks, but it wasn't just anger anymore. It was something deeper, something darker. I wanted to make Tara pay for what she'd done to me, what she had done to my life, my trust, my heart. She thought she had gotten away with it, thought she could just walk out of my life with everything she took. But she was wrong. I wasn't going to let her get away with this. No, I would make her regret everything. I spent hours, days, even formulating the perfect plan. It had to be precise. It had to be calculated. No more emotions, no more mistakes. Tara wouldn't see it coming. I knew her weaknesses, her patterns, everything I needed to make sure she paid. I didn't care about how she felt or what was left of my old self. I was done being the fool. I transformed almost overnight. The man who had once been full of hope and kindness, the one who had believed in Tara, was gone. I became cold, calculating. I started moving through life with a sharp focus I hadn't known I was capable of. My work, my personal life, everything fell into place, but it wasn't about that anymore. It was about Tara, making sure she would feel the same pain I had felt, the same humiliation. I had nothing left to lose. Weeks passed and finally I tracked her down. I had spent too much time looking for her, too much time researching her movements, her life since she left. I found her. Tara was living in a luxury penthouse in the heart of the city, surrounded by expensive things, a life I had never imagined her capable of. She wasn't alone either. There was another man with her, a wealthy-looking guy who seemed to be nothing more than another one of her targets, another man she had lured in. I couldn't believe it. She had already moved on, had already replaced me with someone else. All my rage, all the time I spent obsessing over her, and she was already living the life she had promised me, the life I had given her. I walked into her penthouse without hesitation. She didn't see me coming, her back turned as she stood by the window. I watched her for a moment, watched the way she seemed so carefree, so distant from the woman who had once seemed so broken in my arms. When she turned around and saw me, she froze for just a moment. But then a smirk spread across her face. "You again," she said, her voice filled with amusement. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't even surprised. "Is this what you wanted, Tara?" I asked, my voice low, filled with venom. "Is this the life you've been building on the back of my trust? My money?" She shrugged, completely unfazed. "What did you expect, Jason? Did you think I'd be here waiting for you? You were just a means to an end. You knew that, didn't you?" Her words cut deeper than anything else she had said to me. But I wasn't going to let her see it. I had to stay in control. "You took everything from me. Everything. And for what?" She laughed, a cold, cruel sound. "For what?" "For me, Jason. I don't owe you anything. You gave it all to me, remember? You were a fool for thinking I cared." The anger in me boiled over, but I swallowed it down. This wasn't about rage. This was about making her feel what I felt. I moved closer, confronting her, demanding that she face the consequences. But she just taunted me, looking at me with such contempt that it burned. "You were never worth it," she said. "You're just another guy who couldn't see the truth. I've moved on. I've got everything I need now. And you? You're just part of the past." My heart sank, but I held my ground. This wasn't how it was supposed to end. I had planned this out, had envisioned this moment so many times. But now, staring at her, I realized something I hadn't prepared for. I had been obsessed. I had let her consume me. I had spent all this time thinking that revenge would be my salvation, thinking that hurting her would give me back what she had taken. But it didn't. It never would. Tara had already won. She had moved on. And no amount of revenge would change that. My obsession had cost me everything. My happiness, my peace of mind, and my trust. And here I was facing the woman who had destroyed me, and I realized that nothing I did would ever give me the closure I was searching for. I turned to leave, feeling like a fool. But just as I was about to walk out the door, my phone buzzed. It was a message from my lawyer. "Tara used your credit card for personal expenses. She's facing legal action for fraud. We have all the evidence we need." I stopped in my tracks. A small smile tugged at my lips, but it wasn't one of triumph. It was something else, something bittersweet. Tara had already moved on, but life had dealt her the consequence she thought she could escape. She had gotten everything she wanted, everything I had given her. But it wouldn't last. The consequences of her actions were finally catching up to her. And in that moment, I realized that the best revenge wasn't what I had planned. It wasn't about confronting her, about making her pay for what she did. The best revenge was walking away, leaving her to live in her illusion of victory. As I left that penthouse, I didn't feel satisfied. I didn't feel closure. But I felt something else. I felt free. Tara had taken everything I had given her. But what she didn't take was my ability to move on. And that, I realized, was the only thing that truly mattered.